live from the Experiential Marketing Summit. The question that's on everybody's lips is, how do we engage the most fickle, hardest to move consumers ever in the history of marketing so far? Of course, I'm talking about Generation Z, and today we're going to find out. I'm joined by Henry Lichtblau, who is our guest from Riddle Bloom. He is their VP of Client Success, and he's going to be talking to us today about how to connect and engage with Gen Z, what's important to them, and how Riddle and Bloom continue to be successful for their brands. Henry, welcome to The Scoop.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Very excited to have this discussion.
Now, Riddle and Bloom, you have been at the forefront of what's next from a generational perspective. You've been focused on the next generation now for almost 15 years, so broadly considered experts on the millennials, Gen Z, and now pushing into the alphas. What's the secret to your success and longevity in that next generation space?
So it's a great question, and I would say very rarely is there a one-word answer, but in this case there isn't, and it's access. As you said, this is a fickle cohort. Their tastes shift all the time. The thing that allows us, and by extension the brands that we work with, to engage with this audience is sustained access to their conversations, their networks, their experiences, their communities, digital, physical, social, whatever they may be, because that gives us an opportunity to understand what makes them tick, use that information to build brand messages and experiences, and then turn around and deliver those experiences in a culturally relevant manner.
That's fantastic. And I love how you've talked about access there. Let's talk a little bit about some of your favorite, most recent activations. Your team has been behind some really exciting stuff. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just to take a step back and provide some context on us and our business and our philosophy. So as you said, we have been around for close to 15 years, focused on connecting brands with this rising generation of consumers. And there's a good reason for that, right? There's a demographic reality that says about half the consumers in the United States are under the age of 40. You're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of purchasing power. There is a revenue imperative that says a brand needs to engage with this audience. They need to engage with them now to capture their attention, their loyalty, and ultimately their dollars. And they need to do it now, not only because of the revenue opportunity associated with it, but because in this point in their lives, this is when they are forming the habits and affiliations that are going to carry them through the next 10 to 40 years. So the writing's on the wall for any brand. Now's the time at this sort of entry point stage of life to engage with these consumers. That's really the reality and the challenge that our business is organized around. And so Riddle Bloom has this access-based philosophy to connect brands with this rising generation. And we're part of Wasserman, which is a global ecosystem, Wasserman talent music experience that basically has a consumer passion and connections-based philosophy that says, go with consumer momentum, go with consumer taste, integrate into the experiences and affiliations they already have to provide value. So to bring it back around to where you started, a recent success I would point to is our work with Amazon Prime Student. We've been working with them for going on 5 years, and this is a brand that is, as you can tell from the name, focused on developing products and value and benefit specifically for this student audience. And so what we've done is develop a program run internationally in the United States and Canada at about 400 school communities, where we have an omni-channel mix of peer-to-peer brand ambassador engagement, event and programming-based engagement, social influencer-based engagement, and media-based engagement, all in acknowledgement of the fact that these consumers don't differentiate between those touch points and channels. They want to be engaged on a consistent basis and have value and benefits surfaced in relevant context so that the brand can make its best case.
Something that you said really struck me is you want to capture them at this moment in their lives where they're forming those emotional connections with brands.
Yep.
When we think about Gen Z, something that we know about them is that they're not just looking for the best and brightest product or service, but they're really consciously choosing brands based upon the alignment to their values.
Yep.
Can you talk to me a little bit about how you bring that to life?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things I would point to there, and it's worth mentioning that one of the things that we do with this access that we have to the audience, and this is through partners in the collegiate space, this is through our own national database of 100,000 Gen Zs, is we do regular qualitative and quantitative insights touch points with them. We run an annual census every year with about 1,900 respondents. And one of the things that we saw this year was solid majorities of these consumers basically raising their hand to say, I am likelier to recommend, I am likelier to promote to my friends, I am likelier to purchase if a brand is making clear to me that they support what I support. And conversely, we have solid majorities saying that I'm less likely to purchase a brand or promote a brand if they are taking a position that that I don't like. And so there's a blurred line between Gen Z as consumer and Gen Z as human or even as ideological entity when it comes to their shopping and recommending behaviors. I'll add also that, and as you rightly mentioned, we've been at this for about 15 years. There's been a shift from the millennial to the Gen Z as the entry point consumer. One of the things that we've seen is a rise in entrepreneurialism among these younger consumers. Whereas millennials were saying, hey, I'm going to work hard and get a good job, Gen Zs saw that to a certain extent that might have been a bit of a false promise, and they are more willing to sort of bet on themselves for professional success. But what that means is that when we bring brands into school communities, for example, yes, we're bringing them in from a consumer marketing perspective, but we're also often bringing them in from an employer marketing perspective, because that's speaking to something that the students care about. Is there value we can provide to them to make them more competitive candidates in the job market? So in addition to foregrounding products and services, we're foregrounding exposure to the marketing executives who develop these programs to help students take that step in their lives.
That's amazing. That is really, really exciting. And so, can you give me any examples of some of your recent college activations? Because I know that you've worked on that and you're actually presenting, I think, about that here at EMS. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So another great partner of ours, going on about 6 years now, is Comcast Xfinity. And they have a suite of products targeted explicitly at the entry point consumer and the student audience. It's a mix of streaming services that are available to students living in campus administered housing, as well as students who may be living off campus but want to essentially enter the high-speed data and content ecosystem that the brand provides. So one of the things that we've been doing is building and running a national program at 100 plus schools across the country, basically to take the student from what might be a passive user of streaming platforms and content to one who is tuning in regularly to get the content and must-see shows and TV and so forth that Xfinity is providing. And so that program is part of a larger ecosystem. It's not so dissimilar from the Prime Student work, where you have a mix of events and peer-to-peer work. What we're going to be talking about tomorrow with our partners, both from the school side and the brand side, is a dedicated effort to engage HBCU students in the context of Comcast Xfinity's Black Experience channel. So this is a whole set of content basically that exists in acknowledgement of the significance of this segment to Comcast as a business, and reflective of their investment in this community as well.
That's fantastic.
Yep.
In your role, you get to work with a lot of executives at the forefront of making the decision. When it comes to Gen Z, and just going back to that thing that we touched upon before, where they're choosing based on their values, and brands are having to make these bold choices around where do we align ourselves, where do we stand? What is your advice to executives who are making some of those decisions, particularly when it comes to political stances on, do I stay? Do I go? How do I do this in a way that is authentic and not just jumping on a bandwagon?
Yeah, it's this is another topic that I think is reflective of some of the generational change that we've seen from millennials to Gen Zs. Is not just a willingness, but frankly an expectation on the part of the consumer to engage in a dialogue and a conversation with the brand, and not simply receive a message, but actually stress test what a brand is saying, making sure that they're not just paying lip service, but are actually showing up. And I think that's really the simple diligence, and the brands that we work with, I think, are really doing this the right way. Is if there's something that's important to them, like for example, our partners at Xfinity have a dedicated program, the Rise program, that's focused on supporting small local businesses. when they talk about supporting entrepreneurialism, as I was talking about before, which is so important to this consumer segment, that's not just lip service. There really is something that they can point to say, look, this is a multi-year national effort that we've put in place because this is important to us as a business. It's reflective of who we are. So we have a level of credibility when it comes time to speak to an audience that values that about that program.
Absolutely. And so what are the do's and don'ts on effectively engaging this audience? Because we know that when it comes to authenticity, they're really holding brands accountable. So your clients, you've talked about how they're doing a really great job of actually putting into practice what they're talking about. And Gen Z will be the first to call you on it if you're not.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about what are the do's and don'ts on getting it right.
Yeah, it's hard to perfectly generalize with a demographic that is heterogeneous in its preferences and its particular taste. But I do think what ties them together is you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real. You just have to be authentic, right? So you don't have to get it right all the time, but the stuff that you are getting right, lean into that. You don't have to be all things to all people, but be authentically who you are, as I was alluding to with the Rise program, as I was alluding to with a lot of the employer brand marketing initiatives. If you do have programs that provide opportunities either to students or to communities that students care about, talk about them. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's not necessary to chime in about every issue everywhere. That's not so much the expectation. The expectation is just, hey, level with me. What are you good at? What are you focused on? What are you doing? I'm happy to look at that and take it on its own merits.
Now, we talk about being authentically yourself, and we know that our audiences, a lot of movement and focus around sustainability and taking care of the environment. As events and activation professionals, we take a lot of stuff.
Sure.
Are you seeing a trend towards sustainability in the way that you do your activations? And if so, how are we tackling it, and what do you think we should do?
No, absolutely, and it's funny because it ends up expressing itself, I think, in both in broad narratives and in small tactical choices. So, if a brand is doing right in terms of making it a practice to use recycled or sustainable materials in its packaging or shipping, absolutely, that's something they should be talking about. But I also think there are small choices, like, for example, we've run programs through some of the national collegiate partnerships that I mentioned, where we're actually greeting students at back to school with welcome kits. 3-4 years ago, those were cardboard and packaging and paper and so forth. More recently, they're reusable laundry bags, just as a small choice that says, hey, we heard you. You don't want all of this excess material. No reason for it. Let's actually solve the sustainability problem while providing you something of more value, in the first place, right? So there's a way to find a win from a brand presentation perspective, from a consumer need perspective, frankly, from a cost perspective as well, in listening to the audience on some of these preferences. I will say also that some of the fluidity in this audience's perception in terms of moving seamlessly between in real life experience and digital social creates opportunities to engage with them on a sustained basis at relatively low cost from a sustainability perspective, right? We've got about 2/3 of students saying that they find community from their social and digital access points. So let's meet them there, as opposed to necessarily shelling out a bunch of money for a big stage. There's a time and a place for that, but you don't have to take that solution all the time.
That makes perfect sense. And some really great tips there for people on how to make the right choices. So as we start to wrap up our session, tell me, what are you excited about here at EMS?
I mean, first and foremost, I'm excited simply to be back, right? It's been a long road for all of us over the last several years. We have been very fortunate to work with a great team internally at Riddle Bloom, more broadly across Wasserman, and with all of our clients, to acknowledge that while the world has experienced some upheaval and there's been challenge, the need to engage with this audience hasn't gone away, and that has really compelled some interesting and creative conversations with us about what does it mean to show up in a valuable way for a student now, or for a Gen Z consumer now, today, versus what it meant a few months ago. And one of the big things that we hear time and time again is the rising importance of community to this audience. So how can we tap into community? How can we provide forums for connection with this audience? And how can the brand play a natural role to augment that? And so I think, talking a little bit about that tomorrow with our partners from the HBCU community and from Xfinity will be nice. But I'm also interested to hear what other brands have done to confront exactly the same challenge. I know there are as many creative solutions as there are attendees here, and that's something we're really keen to hear about.
And me too. I can't wait to see you up there on the big stage. Now, before we wrap, hot take, digital and virtual, here to stay or go away?
It's here to stay, but it's necessary but not sufficient, right? This is an audience that exists in a fragmented ecosystem of browsing, shopping, consumption, buying, right? They want a self-directed experience. Yes, of course, it's going to have a digital and virtual component, but something hands-on, a true see for yourself. Frankly, this gets back to the higher expectations that Gen Zs have of brands. Don't just present it to me. Give me a chance to have a tactile experience myself and move through it and understand what it means to me. So it's here, but it's not here by itself.
Great insights. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Henry. It's been an absolute pleasure. Good luck for the rest of EMS, and thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Fallon.
Thank you.
Okay.